So let's get stuck into it. We're going to speak to Sara Gon. She's the head of strategic engagement at the IRR. And it's time to turn up the heat, turn to the spiciest segment of the week, the burning platform, brought to you by Nando's. There's a lot to look at and discuss. Let's start off with Sarah and the DA. Hey, Sarah, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great sound there. So between Phumi and Sarah and I, we've all got our microphones working nicely this morning. So, Sarah, do you want to just start off with your email to me and what you thought we were missing a beat on last week when it came to the DA?
Okay. It's quite a tricky subject because I'm not speaking from a point of view of being, I want to punt the DA as a party and be its cheerleader as a supporter or anything like that.
Fact,
and obviously I'm not speaking
I have to just say that the IRR has done their fair share of criticism of the DA as well as support of them over the years. So yes, I think it's important to make that distinction.
Okay, perhaps I can put it this way. When I was thinking about it, and the sort of getting away from the written word, which one tends to express rather graphically, we are in a hole. The country is in a deep hole in every sense of the word, and for all its faults, and political parties by their nature have faults, the DA has a number of things that I think tend to be, perhaps, if not disregarded, sort of almost treated as if it's, that's what one expects, and this is how things go. And so the criticism of the DA tends to be lumped into the general criticism of opposition. Now, the issue is this: the DA is the official opposition. It's got 84 seats out of 400 in the national parliament. Mm-hmm. And in order to have any impact, it would have to make up such huge numbers. And I agree entirely with what was said last week, that we're actually heading to coalition politics. And we're very unlikely to see a party replace the ANC numerically. Mm-hmm. The thing about the DA is that it can talk from experience. And I think this is the problem. I mean, I hear very often, I'm sure you do too, that, well, what has the DA done about this? Or the DA's done that. Why did they do that? Absolutely fine. That's critical. But the issue is they have actually a record to be measured against. And in the hole that we're in, that becomes very, very, very important in future coalitions. If you look at the numbers, the number of seats in opposition, other than the DA's 84, are 42 seats, and that excludes the EFF. Now, the EFF alone has 44 seats. Now, frankly, I think if anyone really cares about getting South Africa out of this hole and developing South Africa into anything that close to what it could be, you need to be able to discount the EFF as a coalition partner. And the problem is that currently that's not going to. There's no way that can happen because the other numbers are less, and this is why I assume that John Steenhuisen alluded to going into coalition with reformist ANC. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure the ANC has reformists, but that be that as it may. But it becomes a very crucial issue because even if the ANC loses its majority, if it chooses to go into coalition with the EFF, we are stuffed. I can't think of another way of putting it, because they will be in a better, stronger numerical position than they are now. And it's just a matter of purely objective. The DA has, for better or worse, run the Western Cape better than the ANC's run everything else. Most of its municipalities outside of the Western Cape have a better reputation. And again, I'm not saying that there isn't a lot of room for criticism, and
sure.
One could be, there's lots to be discussed, but there is a track record to measure them against.
I'm not trying to put words in your mouth here, but it almost sounds like we have two standards. We measure the ANC by the soft bigotry of low expectations, and they've come to live up to that in some ways. And then we almost have this undeclared, indirect and subconscious way of judging the DA by a higher standard. And I'm not entirely convinced of that argument, but it's worth considering. We think about simple things like, the human rights, an idea of non-racism as opposed to making everything racial. These are things that we tend to measure the DA by those standards because they've imposed them on themselves largely too. And then we give the ANC a much wider berth when it comes to judging them on the specifics. I'm not sure anymore, because I think one thing that South Africans are being exposed to on a repeated basis, and it's something that the DA doesn't maybe have to deal with as much since John Steenhuisen took over. Certainly it happened while Helen Zille was in charge, and it happened while Mmusi Maimane was in charge. But the ANC is being scrutinized in a way that it never has before. I think we can all agree on that.
Absolutely.
And especially with the Zondo Commission going on, we know that this is the ANC on trial, even if they don't admit it.
Yeah.
Now, and Phumi, I want you to come in here at any point, because I know Sarah has some interesting takes on this. What is your point of view on those possible coalitions that you've just discussed? If Julius Malema and the EFF had to ally themselves with the non-reformist part of the ANC, in other words, the part of the ANC that is about radical economic transformation and all of that stuff, really essentially the state capture people with Ace Magashule and company, would that be a substantial enough proportion of the ANC, along with the EFF, to be able to direct things in another direction, to be able to manage the country effectively or ineffectively in that direction?
The reason, and this I do talk from the reason we're so concerned is we actually think there are probably about 3 reformists in the ANC. We believe that it's a matter of style, not substance, and that's really what's very, very worrying. I mean, I've been very critical of the president. I wrote critically against him in 2016, which I think sort of puts me a little bit ahead of the pack on that one. Cyril is a dedicated socialist, and I think that at the end of the day, there is very little distinction. And that's the worrying thing. There were more reformists a few years ago, but that space seems to have shut down. So I think the radical economic transformation grouping reflects a sort of, shall we say, robust, possibly even criminal side of the ANC compared to the other. But I don't think ideologically there's a great deal of difference. And I agree with you. I think the DA has set itself up for being judged by a higher standard. And we do give the ANC a pass in the sense that, we don't expect anything of them. But numbers are everything. And that is the problem. I mean, the ANC... just to give you perhaps an example, the committee that's looking at the change to Section 25 of the Constitution on expropriation, there was a lot of opposition to the fact that the committee refused to hear oral representations about it. We put in, a whole lot of other NGOs put in objections, and the DA, the 4 people on the committee, put in a formal objection that they wanted read into the record about not holding hearings. Now, what's happened is Matoli Masheka, who chairs that committee, has now asked for the extension of the life of the committee to hold hearings. Now, that's opposition from within the government and without, at its best, in the sense that for whatever we believe, all told, a result was achieved. But what you're fighting against when you're in opposition, whether it's formal or informal, is you're fighting against numbers. And as long as you have a list system as we do, you're kicking at the door all the time and struggling to get in. And that's a different debate altogether.
Well, you said you've been critical of Cyril. Phumi has been right at the front of that queue along with you for the longest time. Perhaps you come at it from different angles. But Phums, what's your feeling on what Sarah's just said about, first of all, coalition politics, and second of all, the way that the ANC is broken down at the moment?
The thing for me, and it's always been my view, is that the numbers, because of the way that our politics is constituted, it's always a numbers game. And unfortunately, Sarah, I think that the thing with the opposition parties, and in part of the email that you sent through, is that we tend to look at them all lumped together. But I don't think we do that here at all. Because one of the things that we're quite critical at looking at is and last week in particular, we spoke about, just speaking about the UDM and IFP and why they've lost so much ground, and the polarized FF and the EFF on opposite sides of the scale, and where you have the DA and the ANC much closer to each other. What we actually have is we have very little by which I, as part of the people that are voting, can actually make those decisions, because all of the parties do a very bad job of articulating themselves and what it is that they stand for. So you have a front row seat because of your relationship with the IRR, where you are able to pick apart the various policies of various people, and you are able to see what it is that they are doing in Parliament, where they stand, what they're saying. But for the general public, all we have to go on is what those parties are able to articulate to us, how they look to us, how they sound to us. And that's where the numbers, I think, then fall flat. I really don't think that there is going to be much of a space for coalitions because the guys... Now
Sorry,
I'm going to echo again. Sorry, I just echo again.
No, you broke up. You said there's not much of a space for the coalition because the guys
all, we're kind of going, and this is why the coalition between the EFF and the DA fell apart here in Joburg, why in Pretoria, in Tshwane, why Port Elizabeth is in Port Elizabeth, East London, is in the situation that they are in. It's because their self-interest takes over what it is that they need to be doing. Their self-interest trumps the people on the ground or the people they're supposed to be delivering for. And when, I've always contended that the EFF is actually designed to pull the ANC more to the left. And I think that they probably, I think what Julius wanted to get rid of Jacob Zuma because Jacob Zuma got rid of him, and then he wants to go back into the party. But it's become so difficult for him to go back into the party now because he spent so much time kind of being anti the party and not just anti some of the things that the party stand for. But what he wants is to go back to the ANC.
He would have a bit of a credibility problem now if he did go back, right? And even among his supporters. So, what do you think of Phumi's comments, Sarah? And is it possible? Is it possible to turn your camera on? It seems like Sia's trying. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I thought I had, but as I said, the problem when you work with these different media is they've all got their things in the other side, and it's indicate that the camera is on. So I'll see if I can find it.
Hearing you.
Okay. Let's see there. Okay, got it. Sorry, it's not. It's early morning. Me is not a plus.
No problem. Your Phumi's just said.
No, in fact, what I want to say is I largely I agree in part with what Phumi says, and I think my main criticism is the mainstream media. The social media, the unmainstream, I don't know what the right term is in a different place. And in fact, most of the information I get on what's happening in the DA, etc., is just by going on to different types of social media. It's not the sort of investigative stuff that the IR does. It's going on to various sites, and I'll give you an example of the sort of thing that you do not see in the mainstream media. The DA's national agricultural shadow minister, they are taking up a number of cases, and when I say number, I mean over 40 cases of black farmers who've been evicted from that 700,000 hectares of state land to make room for land reform. Now that whole thing is an absolutely awful mess, but it's one of those things that really needs to be looked at, because surely most, if not all, of those farmers should be left on the land they're on, and if they're successfully farming it, that's fantastic. That's part of the process. I mean, one of the points I made, and this is the problem with any party, but not the EFF, because the EFF, as I say, are colour, they are violence, they are threat, they are theatre, and they do get an enormous amount of attention for that reason. I mean, when the Senekal protest happened, I mean, some of our guys were there, and it was really intended to be almost a series of memorial services. There was nothing in it. The EFF got almost like the front of stage position, and a consequence of it and their chanting and threats, which never materialized, they were well marshaled. The EFF, Julius Malema got an hour-long interview that evening on the issue, and for me, the fault lay entirely with the mainstream media. I mean, that wasn't the issue, but he was colour, And that's really, really worrying, is the fact that most people will rely understandably and obviously on the mainstream media for their information. And the mainstream media is not getting it. It tends to be the alternative media that are saying it, but it's not the alternative media that will get to most people. And that I think stacks up against all the parties, but not so much the EFF.
But what we know for a fact is that mainstream media is not about showing up what each and every individual means or stands for. What they are about is they are about their audience. So we cannot blame the devil for doing its job, right? Their job is getting as much audience as they can, or audience share. And if what they feel is going to get them audience share is a loud Julius Malema, that is their prerogative. And in fact, it does. People tune in when they see Julius and they want to hear what Julius has to say. And the real job is for the political parties to ensure that their message, it's not enough. I mean, I think one of the things that, and we often laugh about it amongst my friends, the DA is prolific with sending out press releases. They will send out 10 press releases in a day. But a press release is only the beginning of piquing an interest. You've got to find a way where whatever it is that you are saying or doing is of general and broad enough interest for mainstream media to want to come and talk to you. If it's just, we're anti this, we're anti that, and spamming, because it's essentially tantamount to spamming is what they're doing with all their press releases for everybody. Nobody's going to pay attention to that.
Like Musi used to spam us with WhatsApps or
with his phone calls.
So Sarah,
I take your point, Phumi, but the reality, and this is not a DA specific issue, but I would take issue on the fact that that they only say what they're against. I mean, they both say what they're going to do. I mean, arguably, whether they do it and whether their feet are held to the fire is another issue altogether. But how do you convey the fact? Let me take, for example, one of their proposals for the economically is to leverage private sector involvement. It's a broad term, and I mean it needs to be unpacked, absolutely. But that is a positive, and I don't think there'd be any disagreement amongst us that that more private sector to achieve things is what is needed in this country. And how do you put across that so that the mainstream media says, aha, this is what our people want to hear? It's just not, in that respect, nobody's going to get off the ground other than the people who, as you say, I mean, Julius Malema, it's like he's like Meghan Markle, it's great for the media. And that's the problem. I mean, can I give you a slightly different example? Herman Mashaba has had quite a lot of exposure given the newness of his party. And I think, to get more parties available for being voted on is absolutely wonderful. But he's not said anything startling. He's not said anything very similar to DA in policies. Not a problem with that at all. But he is being picked up. And I think, and understandably, I'm not necessarily critical of it, he's being picked up because he's a black leader. Yeah. And those are things that, it's almost like a vicious circle. That's essentially what I'm saying.
But if we look at it, hold on, Gareth, can I just say, I mean, if we look at it, let's look at it in the context of American politics and their mainstream media. You have very clearly a left-wing media and a right-wing, right? We're able to say there's Fox News on the one side and there's CNN on the other side, very clearly. And their position is clear. And they are mainstream media. And what the electorate get to do is they either get to toggle between the two or choose a side. But what we have today is we also have a far more democratized access to information and media. You don't only have to be part of the mainstream. Every single political party can, and if they wanted to, talk to the electorate.
I think they also have to be responsible for getting that attention themselves. And if they're good at it, like Julius clearly is, and like Donald Trump clearly was, then they get more share of voice. But I want to ask you both something, because I got admonished the other day by someone who listens to the show and clearly has liked the show for some time, said to me, "Oh, you've got to stop talking about the mainstream media. It makes you sound like one of those conspiracy theorists." Now, all three of us have used the term mainstream media today. I'm curious about what you think that means, and whether or not that's starting to get the undertones of being something conspiratorial and, kind of the outside the tent pissing in type of conversation. What do you guys make of the mainstream media? Because in South Africa, we're dealing with a very different machine to what they have in America. There are a lot of people pretending to be mainstream media, but their audience shares dropping through the floor. And there are other people who are online who are actually commanding an enormous share of voice, but only with a particular number of people in South Africa. We've got to remember, like Twitter, for example, is 3 or 4 million people. So how do we figure that? How do you make sense of that? Sarah, you go first.
Yes, I think you're right about the configuration in South Africa, because in America you've got a very large, it's a very wealthy country, so it's highly literate. It doesn't have the huge distinctions that we have. I mean, there are problems without a doubt, but the media and the ability to set up alternatives to they're legion. They are absolutely legion. So people can get their news from a huge range of sources. Here, just by virtue of economic status, that's a limitation. The fact is that, as in the rest of the world, the nature of newspapers is being read is declining. Television stations probably have the most traction because they're very visible. So but it's definitely, at the end of the day, particularly when you're looking to putting out a political message to the nation, if I can put it that way, you're going to rely very much on what people see in what we call the mainstream media, which is the formal media, the media that is the media in the terms we've always formally understood it. And I mean, one of the things, for example, I mean, I may have missed it, but I haven't really seen for a long time, is debate on the mainstream media. Television in particular, we used to see quite a lot of programs where you'd have A political party, B political party, a debate being hosted by the TV host. You don't see that much anymore. If you want to see that, you go into social media. And social media, from a South African point of view, is growing hugely, but it's still relatively niche. And the problem, what worries me, and I think Phumi's right about getting the message out, and that it depends on getting the message out. But again, how do you get out a message of leverage the private sector? It's very difficult, and that is a challenge that any party has to do. The EFF has never had to do that, and most of us know that we don't really know what the EFF stands for, but it isn't good. That's what we do know, that having them in government is not going to be for the benefit of the country. So the two are fighting against very different things.
No, but you know what they were very good at doing, and unfortunately, this is for me an easy place to go to, because I'm in communications and I spend all day, every day, kind of picking apart who's doing what in terms of communicating. But the thing that I think media, just on the question of mainstream media, I think media has become very disintermediated. So what used to be mainstream media is probably more what we should call established media.
Yes, that's a good word.
With a very pervasive reach in our society. And that would be, for us here in South Africa, which is very small, is one public broadcaster and 2 independents who are not, who are trying to be centrist in the way that they report. But what we also have, and to Sarah's point, that we don't see a lot more debate, we don't see all of that kind of stuff. What we do also have is, because of the declining revenues that they've all had, is we have a huge juniorization of that newsroom, right? So we've got lots of young journalists who may not have the same amount of gumption, the same amount of experience, and even the editors, the news cycle has become shorter. So they have to get more information out more quickly, more frequently, and so they are completely overstretched. That's why they don't have space for a nuanced debate or a nuanced way of viewing all the things. So investigative work, and that's why more and more of private citizens with their YouTube channels, with their podcasts, have an opportunity to delve and dig into the various things. But what this disintermediation of media has done is it has made given everybody an equal chance if they know what to do with it. If they know what to do with it. And unfortunately, we live with on the one side, we live with an EFF that is a highly populist movement that knows how to tag onto the emotional rawness of the people that they want to do and bring them along for that. And on the other side, we have DA, and I choose to speak about the ANC, the DA, and the EFF because they are the best players in our 14-party parliament. Yeah,
but
can
I quickly go back
what
to something?
The DA, sorry, Gareth, I just want to say what the DA tends to fail to do is to talk to the people. In a way that the people can understand what it is that they are saying and break it down. In fact, we had Helen Zilla on the show here. And when I said, unfortunately, you are failing to convince me to come over to your side. Later on in the day, she said on the show, and later on in the day, she said, well, maybe the problem is the electorate. You're never going to win if you think your problem is the people. Come on, Bible. What you know what I'm saying? You can't say the people are the problem. The problem is within. You must convince people to come to you.
So, can I just go away from the media for a second because I always feel like it's it's the brain trying to be aware of itself. it's never a good thing when you're on a media platform talking about the media. So let's just look at what initially brokered this conversation. It is that John Steenhuisen seems to be making noises, and there are even a couple of very quiet but lone, brave voices in the ANC that are saying maybe there is the potential for an ANC-DA collaboration in certain places and in certain ways. If that were possible, let's fantasize for a second about maybe the possibility of, some of the people from the ANC and some of the people from the DA coming together and figuring out a way to manage the country better. Let's just imagine it's possible. Let's put away the questions of whether or not that might ever happen. What kind of situation would that put us in? Is it a remotely constructive situation for us to find ourselves in? Because I see Ndogozo here on the chat is saying he's all for an ANC-DA coalition or a straight-up partnership. There are still some ANC values that I think are necessary to move the country forward. And Ruth and he and Andre are all talking about DA-ANC coalitions. So let's talk about that for a second. What are the possibilities? Go ahead. You start, Sarah.
Okay, let's put it this way. This is politics. Anything's possible. And anything's possible because politics, people talk about ideology, and ideology, I think, is actually the most dangerous basis for running a country. What matters is practically what you are going to offer people and what sort of policies you're going to put in place. And that's why, let's be honest, I mean, you had the unthinkable coalition combination of the EFF and the DA in Joburg and Swane. So it's literally, what do they say about politics being the art of the possible or whatever it may be? But that is really literally the event. So in other words, one recognizes that... one recognizes that you do compromise, and whatever the DA may say, you may compromise on quality. Sorry, I'll just take my camera off.
Oh, okay.
I'm just trying to avoid the echo.
Okay.
So it is always possible, but as we see it at the moment, it's the possibility of just getting further and further into the mire when there are options. And this is, again, where I think particularly perhaps the informal media, non-established media comes in, is that to some extent, it's not necessarily about not providing people what they need to hear. It's about allowing people to hear things and see whether they respond to them or not. And a discussion about policy, I mean, I think that's absolutely crucial. Get the parties onto platforms to say, these are our policies, these are what we want to do, these are our successes. And and that's what I'm saying simply about the DA in the fraught situation that we're in. We just don't have as much luxury. New parties can come onto the scene, but it's incredibly difficult to start and maintain a party. It's a very, very complex machine. So it's a case very much in the same way as looking at the pragmatics of coalition. You're saying, okay, you're not necessarily conveying your ideas terribly well, but you do have something worthwhile and interesting to say. Let's drill down to that, and we don't hear that often. And as I say, what I would really pay attention to is the fact is, if we're looking at the practicalities, DA has to be given some kudos in a very awful political environment for having made some significant achievements. And it's not that it's world-beating or absolutely astonishing. It's just leading. It's managing and it's governing in a certain way.
Phumi, what do you think? If there were an ANC-DA coalition in the form that perhaps it took in certain wards and municipalities, what do you think that might be like?
I see it. One of the reasons why I cannot see it, even in my wildest imagination, is because the guys are so opposed to each other. And the thing that makes it, if you're going to make a relationship work, you have to be looking and willing to find the best part of the other. And where we sit is we sit with everybody looking for the worst part of the other. And so they're unable to bridge the gap between each other. Because they kind of, you just hear the ANC thinks the DA does this, the EFF does this, the EFF and the DA think the ANC is this, and that's why it then becomes, you then see Julius go and have tea in Gatla, and you're like, how? You've just spent the past 3 years telling us how horrendous this man is and how bad he is, and now you're having tea, and it's the same. It's the same thing, I think, with the DA and the ANC. It would be hard for me to see how they can find the bridge to their commonalities. Because if you're going to make a relationship work, that's what you need. You need to find the common ground and move on from there.
Yeah. Can I just come back to, I think Phumi's right, but I'd like to come back to my point about the practicalities. I mean, you'd be amazed what people can compromise on when they feel they have to. I agree. I don't think you'd ever see an ANC-DA coalition. What you probably are best looking at is almost a sort of defection of the support of a certain number of people. It may even be the split up of the party. The thing about politics, and particularly South African politics, is by this time next year, the environment could look completely and utterly different. You may have an ANC split. It may be conducive to a coalition. The problem is, and this probably comes back to my original point, is one doesn't really know. And also, politicians, fabulous, stand outside, bitch at each other, bitch at what they're doing. That is how politics works. But behind the scenes, if people do want to make things to work, things are possible. I'm not even going to say desirable, but possible.
Okay, well, I mean, one of the points here is that besides the numbers that could come from a coalition like this, I think the ANC wants to look competent. This is a comment one of our listeners just made. The ANC actually wants to look competent, and that's something the DA can help them with. And the DA wants access to power, so that's something the ANC can help the DA with. So there is a way that you could have these two scratching each other's backs, and it might not boil down to the kind of personality politics that we're so used to, and the idea of this cult of personality, which is unfortunate, but it's taken over all over the world. One other thing, and maybe this is where Helen Ziller did have a point. The electorate do let themselves down, and we as citizens are not as informed as we could be. I mean, most people don't have the ability to assess policy in general or in context.
Very, very difficult.
And this is precisely why when you do stunts like, going to Senegal or talking about shampoo or whatever, that gets the attention. Or talking about Love Island, for fuck's sake. These are the kinds of things that get people, they get attention. It's not policy that gets attention. And this is maybe where we do have to reckon with the fact that we have, just like in many other parts of the world, in fact, in any democracy, the majority of the people in any country are pretty simple. They don't want a complicated message from the politicians. If you look after their basic needs and interests, they want to have opportunities for employment. They want to have basic services delivered. If we can do those things, then as good as that is for the party, it's not very interesting and won't keep you.
Not at all.
It won't keep you in the front of people's minds.
Can I? Yeah, I mean, this is the eternal problem in politics. I mean, take for example the municipalities of Midvaal and Umfuleni. They are kind of next to each other. Midvaal is run by an incredibly dynamic young mayor. I think he's in his mid-30s. He's been actually a mayor for about 8 years, and Midvaal has always, had a great reputation. Now, it's very easy to run down a municipality. It doesn't matter who your residents are, what color, what, etc. To keep a municipality going takes just hard, dedicated slog. Next to it, you've got Umfuleni, which I think if there's a place that could literally be called a shithole, it has to be Umfuleni. And it's what we're struggling with, and DA no less than anyone else, but really struggling with, is that the examples of success versus failure are not sufficiently grabbing people's attention. Although, and I say this having said, this protest where the poor man was killed yesterday in Braamfontein, listening to 702 people, sending in their comments of the experience. Now, there were a range of comments, but there was almost one comment in particular, or everyone. The ANC has ruined things through theft and corruption, and that perhaps if they hadn't, the police would be better trained and students would not end up having to be in this position of protesting. Now, that in a way, it was almost uniform. It was absolute. And that is the experience that is starting to inform people. But I agree. I think it's the nuts and bolts of people saying, well, hang on a sec. How can these people make my life better? What is the example of the municipality across the road? And I don't know how one changes that.
My view is how one changes that is you don't go, can these people make my life better? You go, how do I participate in making this better? You stand up and you are part of what it is that makes your municipality is where you live. You have to participate and be part of that. You can't just be looking at someone over there. Who is this man called government? It's made up of people. It's made up of hands and feet and eyes, and and those hands and feet and eyes are our eyes. We have to do something about it.
I agree with you entirely. And in fact, what's happening, and I think it's growing in momentum, and it is growing in response to a decreasingly bad or increasingly bad situation, is you are seeing residents, particularly of small towns, because it's manageable. Big cities are very difficult, but residents of small towns across the board getting together, repairing sewage, repairing potholes. They are just taking the initiative to improve their lives. And the wonderful thing about that is it goes exactly to Phumu's point. It's about people taking control of their lives and improving their lives. And it's also about people doing it for themselves, but for each other. So in other words, it's not a kind of the white side of town or the black side of town. People are getting together. They realize what's good for themselves is good for the other. And that's a crucially human response to make. And I heard of an example yesterday that I didn't actually know before. 6 years ago, Schweizer Reinecker, that's exactly what they did. And they developed a very elaborate scheme to employ people to do fixing on a roster basis. So everyone got an opportunity to be employed in the process. They had lawyers set up trust funds for their rates. And then a court said, no, they can't have that. The municipality must run the environment, and it stopped. Now, if that isn't a perfect example of people doing it for themselves and then being hindered by
bureaucracy,
worse than unnecessary government. But it's starting to pick up a pace, and that is certainly, and I think every party should feed into assisting that. It mustn't take it away from it.
Guys, it would be remiss of me, because we've only got about 10 to 15 minutes left. It would be remiss of me not to refer to some of the other big stories going on. Now, we found out that this week our economy has contracted by 7%. and this is the single largest contraction since 11 years ago, I think it was. We knew that we would have some difficulty because of lockdowns and all the stuff that happened last year. But we've been on this kind of steady decline in terms of growth. We've had minimal growth, and it's been getting smaller and smaller and smaller over the last few years. How do we fix this? And what do you think the biggest obstacles are from a political point of view to South Africa getting back on track? We see other economies all over the world starting to get back into action. And of course, we're lagging.
Liberalization. And it's liberalization of the economy. It's making it easier for people to start businesses. And when you can start businesses, you can employ people. You've got to cut down red tape.
What kind
you've got to find
are we talking
red tape that involve licenses, permission, all those sorts of things that make. You've got to simplify those processes completely, whether it's a formal business or it's an informal business. I think the other thing is part of the process, because it's linked to the fact of how well educated your workforce is there has to be, and I know this may not be popular, but a real emphasis on skills as opposed to education, post school education, skills in artisanal skills.
Sorry, Phumi and I were actually talking about that earlier with the WITS protests that have been going on. And we were saying that is something that needs emphasis. Phums, you've also, you're a small business owner and you know about red tape and regulation. Would you agree with Sarah on that front?
I have to tell you this very funny story. You know, we're moving offices and trying to get a new line. And I'm going to, should I tell you who they are? Well, it's two.
Yeah, go ahead.
A public sector service provider and a private sector service provider. So public for the telephone lines and private for the fiber. I think I have signed and re-signed almost 100 pieces of paper between the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they don't get it on the other side. Can you print it and can you scan it? And can you, I'm like, I work in a paperless environment. So both private and public have the same hurdles. And the red tape is ridiculous, but we are also overtaxed. I think businesses in this country are completely overtaxed.
Absolutely.
And that's also one of the levers that our government can pull in terms of alleviating and allowing money to circulate back into the economy is really, you know, there's so many taxes that we don't need, but we have them.
In fact, I think they reported the other day that personal income tax is now the largest proportion of GDP that it has ever been. Now that is a sign of failure, because your taxation, your successful taxation, should come mostly from a whole lot of other things, but not from personal tax. It's the absence of personal tax or the reduction of personal tax that encourages you to innovate and to grow. And I think one of the problems that it's very much a sort of mindset of the ANC is that you achieve adherence by penalizing as opposed to rewarding, whether it be a tax break, whatever it may be. And that's a mindset we've got to get out of, is that if the government, if a group of citizens do something that benefits society in any way, there should be reward rather than punishment. Punishment is for being criminal, for not paying taxes that you were obliged to pay.
Yeah.
So
what do you
these are thoughts.
What do you make of Eskom? They've gone back into stage 2 load shedding. They did say to us, and they keep on saying, you know, it's going to take a long time for us to fix this. But is there light at the end of the tunnel? The fact that we've had maybe proportionally less load shedding in the last couple of months? Are we starting to see any improvements there, or do you think that this is just part of the general decline?
Are we in the tunnel? Let me put it this way. I have absolutely no idea about what's happening regarding the allegations of racism against Andre de Ruyter's. But what it is a sign of is of an organization that is beyond crucial to the economy, and yet it's moribund. It's absolutely moribund. I mean, there's little economic activity, and whatever they have built, and apparently Kusile and Medupi are a disgrace of note, can't can't provide on a regular basis what we've got. So clearly what is happening is not working, or it's not working sufficiently, and it's got to be all hands on deck. And again, if the private sector can make a difference, it must be allowed to make a difference. It doesn't matter where the energy comes from, it's that it comes.
Yeah. Okay. Any comments?
I just thought it was very interesting, the timing of the new schedule of load shedding. So, you have all this hoo-ha about Andre de Ruyter and allegations of racism and the board finally stepping in, and then boom, 24 hours later, load shedding. And I'm just like, how is this load shedding being used to kind of to pull the wool over our eyes? Is it smoke and mirrors redirecting us to other things? I'm just like, hi guys.
Something that Badner brings up, he says R.W. Johnson has been writing some interesting stuff lately. He's always interesting, and he's been pretty much on the money every time. How is our low-functioning population voting ANC continuously any different from the low-functioning ZANU-PF population in Zim? Given that and by that I think they mean also like unemployed.
What does low functioning mean?
I don't know what that.
It's
not a great term.
Not a great term.
He says voting fraud is not happening, or is it? Discussion about this is like a tea party on the Titanic. My heart aches. Blah 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 blah. So let's just start off with the fact that people have been comparing South Africa to Zimbabwe for years now, and I don't know that the comparison is necessarily spot on. I think that there are probably some similarities. You could draw similarities between us and any country. I hear people comparing us to the US on one hand and to Venezuela on the other. So it's not helpful, I don't think. And also this idea of low functioning, what I think we have in this country is not stupid people, because we have lots of very complicated social situations. We have child-headed households. We have people who are living in rural areas. Most of them are eking out a survival, which means that they're street smart. And we cannot throw those people under the bus because the system has failed them. What we need to do is acknowledge that South Africa is one of those places where sometimes the social safety net, as poor as it may be and as porous as it may be, and as little as the welfare that we can dole out is, we have an enormous problem with finding meaningful, gainful employment for people. And perhaps that's something that we should start dealing with in a more real and driven way.
I think one of the biggest problems, if a country is badly managed, is that everyone's expectations drop. And it's those drop in expectations. You don't expect anything from the government. You know your education has been poor. Too many taxes, too much in the way taxes have been paid and too little has been in return. And I think one of the problems that happens with that is that because everyone's expectations drop, it becomes more and more difficult to really galvanize people to, as Phumi said earlier, to sort of take control of their own lives and their own environment. It becomes almost a form of stasis, and this is across the board. And our similarity with Zimbabwe is not so much the practicalities and the facts; it's the commonality in pursuing a political ideology that just doesn't work. And for better or for worse, the successful countries in the world are freer countries ideologically and politically. And what we do still have is we have the right to the freedom of speech, we have the right to express our views, and people do express their views. And that is an extraordinary thing that I watch sort of change from the apartheid era over, is that absolute sense of that right to express views. The problem is moving towards taking it, grabbing the politicians by the throat rather than the other way around. And once your expectations are dropped, to try and work out of that is very, very difficult. And that's, as a society, what we've got to encourage, is that it's your country. Don't worry about the politicians. And so far as you can take control, take control. That's a slow and difficult process. But that is the difference, I think.
I think it's easy to say that the freer countries are doing better in the world. I mean, I think when we look at China and what's happening in China, they have had 35 years of growth, and they're currently sitting in a place where they're very likely going to overtake the US as a global powerhouse, economic powerhouse, right? and they're not a free country.
No.
But I do want to
sorry.
say, but I do want to say to Werner, I think it is absolutely disgusting to say that people are low functioning and therefore they vote a particular way. That it's unacceptable, actually, to think that there is some kind of the straight line between what people think or how people think and the level and their poverty and what it is that they need their government to do for them. It's almost exactly the same as a party saying that, well, we need to look at the people who vote if they won't vote for us. That's ridiculous. That's you, dude.
Yeah.
Reevaluate those words.
Yeah, I think. Listen, I mean, I think we're all agreed on that front, but he expressed himself very poorly on that comment, and I thought it was worth referring to, not ignoring and sweeping under the carpet. Ntokoza says this is an interesting point we can end on, and it's ending where we started. He says the social safety net is necessary in South Africa, and that is why I don't think the DA will ever take over. They refuse to acknowledge this. Do you think that's fair?
I don't, but it comes again to the information, because if you look at DA policy, what essentially they're looking at is a free market economic society, a free market society, but it absolutely does recognize that people have to be supported who cannot support, who aren't in a position to support themselves. So, the DA is not a sort of an absolutist. It's certainly not libertarian. In fact, some may argue that perhaps it has too much of a mix. But that's how one sees it. But the point is, the DA doesn't, and it's look. I'm not going to say whether the DA gets out its message well on that or not. Clearly, it hasn't got it out well enough for the listener. But the point is that the general impression, I think, is that the ANC is the party of social support, and the DA is not. And those are some of the issues that have got to be dealt. Anyone who's going to make the society succeed understands that people need support.
They need to do better messaging around that. So I'm not going to make excuses for them. And I hope in some way you've assuaged some of the bias that we may be displaying on the show by being here this morning, Sarah. Phumi, any final parting shot from you before we wrap it up?
That's my favorite thing. You got to stand up, get up, stand up, and do it for yourselves, people.
There we go. She hasn't changed her tune, not for one.
Good for her.
Great to have you on the show. Thank you very much, Phumi. Always good to have you on.